Do one up on scene. I'll be assuming Caroline Street Command. I got a 2.5-story wood occupied multiple dwelling. I got heavy fire from the second floor, Charlie side. I have an exposure on the Delta side. We have one line stretch not in operation yet. Primary searches are underway. Status of the fire is doubtful. One passing command. I'm on the first line. Service speed advised. We're on scene. 2-story wood frame. I got heavy fire from the Alpha side.
To the Volley Chief. This is going to be one of my freelancing episodes where I'm just going to, it's just me you're going to have to listen to. So I decided today to, as the recording of this, it is January 23rd, 2025, and I wanted to take a minute because reflect on something. Today is the anniversary of my grandfather's death. It was January 23rd, 2012. My grandfather passed, and I know by now a lot of you have, we've talked about him very frequently on the show. And even, a lot of my guests will go back to, stories about Pa, and as he was affectionately known throughout the Valley as Pa in his later years, thanks to us. So I thought I'd talk about him, his legacy, kind of his story, and just to give you a little bit of a standpoint of a reference when we're talking about Pa and what he did, and how he got his start, what he did for the Valley, our area of town. His story actually starts out a lot like most of ours in the volunteer fire service, and that's his father was a fireman, right? So we talk a lot about. I always say to everyone, we talk a lot about my grandfather's accomplishments, but my great grandfather actually did a lot too. Ed Cotter Sr. was fire chief of the Derby Fire Department. It was actually very exciting because I was chief 100 years after my great-grandfather. He was also, before we had a fire marshal, the fire chief did some of those duties, and I have an article written in Fire Engineering, which back then was Fire and Water Engineering, about the accomplishments of my great-grandfather. And at the time, in 1939, when my grandfather joined the volunteer fire department here in Derby, it was kind of ironic, if you will, because the reason he joined was they needed drivers. They were running low on drivers. Again, here we are, almost 100 years later, and they still need drivers. So right after graduating high school, my grandfather got a job for the Evening Sentinel, which was the local newspaper. And again, different times, different things. They actually had offices in downtown Derby and downtown Ansonia. So even though the Valley's small, they were so busy back then in the 30s with the newspaper, they had 2 offices. And the Derby office was located on Elizabeth Street next door to the old Storm Engine Company firehouse. So for those of you who know the area, the original Storm's firehouse was kind of where the Plaza on the Green restaurant is today. I think it's called Fuego out of coincidence, but it was Connie's for a long time. Most people knew it as that. But the firehouse was next door. My great-grandfather said to my grandfather, hey, we need drivers. So it got him involved in being a member of the fire service. And he joined the Storms, joined the volunteer fire department, and worked his way up to, being a driver. And then, like, all the members of that greatest generation, their life plans drastically altered in the end of 1941. My grandfather was sitting in his house on Hawthorne Avenue across from Oak Cliff Cemetery when the radio report started that Japan attacked America and we were at war. My great-grandfather was a World War I veteran of the Army, and his advice to his kids at the time was don't join the Army. So my grandfather went and joined the Navy. He reported to the U.S. Naval Station in Newport, Rhode Island, where the first day he was asked he said, picture the war had broken out. There was thousands of recruits. He said they were lined up, and they came around and asked if anybody had any firefighting or police experience. And my grandfather and another gentleman, Robert Halstead from ironically from Bridgeport, both raised their hand that they were, firefighters, and they sent them to the base fire department. So he was sent to the Newport Naval Base Fire Department to be a firefighter. It wasn't soon that he was able to get into a position to do training and start teaching. And he was tapped to do be in charge of training shipboard firefighting for new recruits, and also he was running the day-to-day operations of the Newport Base Fire Department, which back then it had grown pretty rapidly and pretty quickly. He spent some time doing this, and then finally, like most, back then, you watch the typical story. He spent some time here training, doing things like that. He decided that he wanted to get in on the action, so he put in and was able to get moved to the USS New Hanover, which was a Liberty ship, the AKA 73, which was being built in Virginia. He swung through Connecticut on his way down, got married along the way, and then went to Virginia, where he was part of the commissioning crew. From there, the ship went through the Panama Canal and was involved in the Battle of Okinawa, and then, also then went on to be part of the occupying force in Tokyo. Returning back to Derby after the end of the war, he was asked by the town fathers to serve as one of the assistant fire chiefs. They knew of his wartime experience. They knew the knowledge that he had gained, what he had done in the military. So he took the position. He said that he would, a couple of things that he said he would take the position. Obviously, back in the 1940s, the fire department was a little bit more separated when it came to the companies. A lot of times the companies stayed very in their own lane. So the chief from one company wouldn't order another company to do anything, because even though you may be a higher ranking chief, the companies were separated, I should say. So that was one of the things that he, agreed to take the position, understanding that he would not abide by that, that if he was going to be in charge, he would be in charge. And it took a little bit of convincing of the other members and the other companies, but he was able to overcome that. His forethought of things led us to 1948, when after years of responding to incidents and, he would say seeing literally people die in the street, him along with the fire chief at the time, Richard Kiley, the two of them got some Valley businessmen together, and they formed the Storm Ambulance Corps. And the Storm Ambulance Corps was the first ambulance corps in the lower Naugatuck Valley area where we are. And he was co-founder of that along with Chief Kiley. And finally, he finished his firefight chief term in 1954, and he continued as president of the ambulance corps until 1985. He always kept the ambulance corps on the cutting edge of technology. And for those of you who have listened, for those of you who understand the relations, the ambulance corps is a private, separate corporation from the city, which allows you a little bit of flexibility, right? So when I was fire chief in the Derby Fire Department, if I wanted to buy thermal imaging cameras, or if I wanted to spend so much money, I had to go seek permission from the higher-ups. Where the ambulance corps, you had a lot more control over the operations of the organization. So this is one of the reasons he was able to, if you will, steer the corps in a different direction, because he was able to do it with minimal oversight. In 1952, great increased motor vehicle accident. The Valley still had a massive industrial base, a lot of factories everywhere. He saw the need for another vehicle to respond to these types of motor vehicle industrial accidents, and a Jeep, a surplus military Jeep, was purchased, and it became our first rescue truck, which I think is just totally awesome, right? You think about a 1950s Willys Jeep as a rescue truck. We actually have a couple pictures of it. They painted it white with red lettering. And then in 1955, the early 1955, they got a rescue boat, a small rescue boat, which, very, very excellent timing, because in the summer and fall of 1955, the Valley would suffer the 55 floods. The boat was used to rescue numerous residents in Derby and Ansonia. Also, they lost it during the storm. They got it a little bit too deep, and the boat was lost. My grandfather would actually tell us the story of how the Naugatuck fire chief called him in the middle of the night to borrow the boat and said, "Hey, the Naugatuck River's flooding. Can you come up here with the boat?" He said, and my grandfather said to him, I can't, because if the river's flooding in Naugatuck, which is, 15 miles north of us, what do you think it's going to do here? And that's what got him out on the road to go look, to watch as he would tell us the story, he watched the flood come up over the top of the banks of the river. Let's see. After the flood, he was named fire coordinator for Derby with the responsibility of securing federal funds and firefighter training for the fire department in recovering from the flood. And then there was a lot of firsts. We talk about a lot. The ambulance corps had numerous firsts along the way. They were the first to have two-way radio communications with the hospital, the first in the valley to have certified emergency medical technicians. A couple of the guys from the firehouse, they were actually talking that there was an EMT class being sponsored by Griffin Hospital. And my grandfather was a huge believer in the younger generation being trained up. And when the younger generation came along and he tried to get them in the EMT class, they told they were too young. So not wanting to stop him, he sent them to Waterbury to go take the class up there and said, well, if you're not going to let us take it here, we'll go take it someplace else. We were the first to carry hair traction splints, the first to have defibrillators, the first to have mass trousers in our region. We were also the first to utilize airbags. We were the first to have advanced life support, which back then was EMTIs, or now EMTAs. And it wasn't just Derby, right? He was on the committee the ad hoc committee that formed the South Central Emergency Medical Services Council. We also joined the CMED system the day it went into operation. And that was on the medical side, right? He also was we were one of the first departments to have a Jaws of Life tool. We were the third one sold in the nation, and they used it about 20 minutes after it was put into service to remove a trap driver in a vehicle accident in Ansonia. And then that was just the ambulance and rescue side. On the firefighting side of things, you know, he was an instructor at the New Haven Fire School from 1947 until 1948. And I know that a lot of people understand the New Haven Fire School is one of the premier fire schools in the country. It's always been. And as you can imagine, from in the 1940s to the 1970s, that, you know, my grandfather carried such weight that he was an instructor for the New Haven Fire School. So, you know, he taught career firefighters as a volunteer fire chief because of the reputation that he had earned. In 1966, he organized the Derby Fire Training School, which morphed into the Valley, currently the Valley Fire Training School. Originally, it was located on Main Street in Derby. It moved down to where the rivers met. And then, obviously, you know, the politicians came in and took over, and we know how that went. During his career, too, he also wore many other hats in the city of Derby. From 1956 to 1960, he was civil defense director, which obviously back in the 60s during the Cold War, that was a big thing. He was the New Haven County representative on the Governor's Council of Firefighting in the 1950s. That would be what formed the Commission of Fire Prevention and Control and the Connecticut Fire School. Valley Council for Civil Defense Governments. He was fire commissioner in Derby from 70 to 78. He was the chairman of the board of directors of the Valley Veterans Memorial Center. He volunteered as a photographer and was a special police officer for the Derby Fire Department. And all that, they even did things back then, like they volunteered as umpires for Little League. The fire department did stuff like that. They organized blood banks for the Red Cross. And you know, a lot of this he did, obviously, while working full-time as a photographer. You know, there are many who have stories of him you know, pulling up on a scene, snapping a picture, throwing the camera in the trunk, putting his gear on and going. And then when the fire was out, he'd get in the car and speed off to go develop the pictures or bring them to the paper. He received three awards to mention. Was the Charles Flynn Humanitarian Award, the Gold Seal from the Chamber of Commerce, and the state, the Bar Association gave him an award, the Law Day Award. In 2010, Pa, along with one of his lifelong friends, Father Thomas Burbick, were inducted to the Connecticut State Firefighters Hall of Fame. He was extremely excited about that and proud of that, especially being inducted with Father Burbick. Father Burbick began his fire service career at the Storms, serving as the priest at St. Mary's next door to the Storms. And, you know, coming over to calls, there's actually still a button at the Storms. Father Burbick was extremely tall, so there was a button that they put on the door that he could reach up and unlock the door so he didn't have to run all the way around the building with the key. He's also been inducted to the Connecticut Journalism Hall of Fame for his work as a photojournalist. It's, you know, very weird because, again, you know, he was our grandfather. He was Pa. He was we wanted to be with him. I know my parents will hear this, but we wanted to be with him more than we wanted to be with them, because if we were with Pa, we were going to see action, right? There was going to be excitement. When he was 84 years old, there was a car accident in Oxford. He came across it. The victim in the car was in cardiac arrest. He pulled the victim from the car, administered CPR, and the victim lived. At 84, you'd think that he was still putting that kind of effort into, still driving around and seeing things. Again, passed away today in 2012, and the funeral was an extremely, extremely nice tribute. There was over 200 people that attended. A lot of members in uniform. A lot of political figures were there. I remember when Father Berwick gave his eulogy, he said very simply that when Eddie Cotter spoke during an emergency, everyone stopped to listen. And, obviously we grew up in that legacy, and I think we would always joke that he'd be very proud of us. That's something that gets said a lot at the Storms and a lot with us. With myself and Tommy and Bree following into his footsteps, I have to also mention Anthony. So Pa's neighbor was Anthony DeLucia, who was a guest on the show. Anthony's an assistant chief, and Aunt Sonia. The group of us that grew up around Pa are all, stories lead back to Pa. All the good, funny stories lead back to Pa. And I just thought that I would, take today and tell you the story of him. To us, it was extremely awesome, really, that we got to spend, we got to fight fires with our grandfather and our father. And it was just, you talk about the volunteer fire service and talk about the family commitment. He would beat us in his 70s and 80s. He would beat us to fires like it was nothing. And I'm just saying that, that's some of the stories, and everyone has stories about them, whether they're, good or bad, whether they're funny or not, whether it's a Pa trying to fix something at the firehouse, or, whether it's, a project gone awry or a run from the ambulance that didn't work. I always laugh. I always think because shortly when he stopped going on calls, there was obviously news that he had stopped going on calls. In the one of the news stations came out and did a story about him, and they asked him, why he did it, and he, said it's simple. He said, people helping people is what makes the world go round, and I think those are great words from him, and I think it's the truth, and I think that that's where I get it from. My brother gets it from, my sister gets it from. We grew up in that field, and we grew up with him, and I just wanted to take today and say, you know what? It's my podcast. This is what I'm going to talk about. So this is what we're talking about. I'm going to leave here with an audio clip of an accident that somehow from the 1970s I have of him. So I'm going to insert that in now, and then just let you listen to it, and then we'll call it a day. So thanks for listening. We'll be back next week. And as always, stay safe. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Click the like button. Click the subscribe button. It helps me with the Facebook gods and the gods of all social media. So thank you. Be safe.
We have a serious accident involving multiple injuries. We request the hospital disaster team be notified and that a doctor be dispatched to the scene for triage.
FD1's back in service. Commands terminated.